Welcome to the deep dive. If you're working with Ruby and Ruby on Rails in Visual Studio Code, like so many developers are these days, you've probably asked yourself how to really get the most out of that setup.
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today. We've looked at, well, a whole bunch of stuff, blog posts packed with extension ideas, setup guides, official docs from VS Code and Ruby LSP, and what people are actually saying in community discussions.
Right, so our mission here really is to give you the practical know-how. What are the best VS Code extensions? What configurations actually work for Ruby and Rails?
Yeah, the goal is to help you make your coding smoother, maybe even more enjoyable, definitely more productive. Think of this as like your roadmap to unlocking VS Code's potential for Ruby and Rails.
Okay, we'll be covering testing, code smarts, formatting, debugging, all that good stuff.
All drawing from what the experts recommend and what the community's found actually works in practice.
Okay, so let's unpack this. It's pretty clear VS Code is a major player now, isn't it? I saw the Ruby on Rails community survey mentioned its popularity keeps climbing.
It really does. But let's be honest, sometimes making VS Code feel as seamless for Ruby as a dedicated IDE might, well, it can feel like it takes a bit more fiddling at first. Is that something you've heard too?
Oh, absolutely. That came up in some of the Reddit threads we saw. That initial feeling of, is this really set up for Ruby?
It's a common starting point, yeah. But what the sources, especially those practical guides, keep stressing is that if you choose the right extensions and, configure things thoughtfully, VS Code can actually become super powerful for Ruby and Rails.
Powerful enough to compete with things like Ruby Mine, even.
Some people definitely argue that, yeah. Once it's dialed in, the features and the workflow can be pretty comparable.
Okay, so if someone wants to get it dialed in, where's the best place to start? Sounds like extensions are the absolute key.
Extensions are definitely the foundation. And if you had to pick just one cornerstone for a modern Ruby Rails setup in VS Code, it's got to be the Ruby LSP.
To Ruby LSP. Oh.
And it's significant that it's now the officially recommended Ruby extension in the main VS Code documentation. That says a lot.
That is a strong signal. So what makes it so essential? What's it actually doing for you?
Well, it bundles a ton of functionality, and it's gotten really good lately. It's like your smart assistant for Ruby code inside VS Code.
Okay.
It gives you all that core navigation stuff like go to definition, hover information so you can see method details without leaving your spot.
Uh-huh.
Really good IntelliSense, code completion, which just saves tons of typing and mistakes. It also does these neat inlay hints, like showing parameter names right in the
Oh,
code
okay, I've seen those.
and semantic syntax highlighting. That's a big one.
Semantic highlighting. That sounds like more than just basic keyword coloring.
Exactly. It understands the meaning of the code. So, like, method calls might always look different from local variables, making the code structure much clearer, easier to scan.
Right, you can see the patterns better.
Totally. And beyond that, Ruby LSP takes care of linting and formatting. It usually works right out of the box with Rubocop or syntax tree to keep your code style consistent.
And quick fixes, too.
Yep, quick fixes for common issues, and even some basic refactoring tools to help you clean up or restructure your code safely.
Wow, okay, that's a really comprehensive package. Is it, like, hard to install? Do you need to fiddle with gems much?
That's one of his big selling points, actually. The setup is generally much easier than older solutions. It often just works. You install the extension, and it figures things out. No need to manually add a bunch of gems just for the editor, usually.
That's a relief.
And it updates itself automatically. Plus, crucially for Ruby devs, it plays nice with RubinV, the version manager, so it understands which Ruby version your project needs.
Ah, yeah, managing different Ruby versions across projects is key, so it handles that automatically.
Pretty much, yeah. It helps avoid those tricky version conflicts between projects.
Are there any common, like, gotchas or problems people run into with the Ruby LSP?
The official troubleshooting guide does mention a few things. Sometimes it's just outdated versions of the extension of the server component it uses.
Okay.
Shell environment issues can sometimes mess with it starting up correctly. And, occasionally bundler problems like gem conflicts in your project can cause headaches.
Right. Standard Ruby stuff, almost.
Kinda, yeah. Keeping your gems and bundler updated is usually the first thing they suggest checking.
Okay, so Ruby LST is definitely step one, the bedrock. What's next? For me, testing efficiently is, like, super important. How does VS Code stack up there?
You're totally right. Testing is critical. And yeah, VS Code has some really good extensions to help streamline that whole process. Rails Run Specs is a really popular one.
Rails run specs. Okay.
It lets you run tests your whole suite, just one file, or even just the specific test block your cursor is in, using keyboard shortcuts or commands. Super flexible.
Oh, running just the block you're working on sounds amazing. Does it work with both RSpec and Minitest?
It does, yeah. Supports both of the main frameworks people use.
Nice. What about actually seeing the results easily?
For a more visual approach, there's Ruby Test Explorer. It gives you a dedicated panel, like a tree view of all your tests.
Ah, okay.
You can click to run tests, see what passed or failed, and jump straight to failures. Also works with RSpec and Minitest.
That sounds really helpful for managing a large test suite.
And then there's the simple but brilliant go-to test, or sometimes it's called switch to test.
Ah, yeah, jumping between the code and the test file.
Exactly. A keyboard shortcut or command just toggles you back and forth. Think how many times a day you do that manually. It sounds small, but it saves so much friction.
Totally. That constant file switching adds up. I think I saw a note somewhere that switch to test might need a tiny bit of setup for Ruby.
Good catch. Yeah, since it's a more general extension, you might need to add a little config in your VS Code settings so it knows how to find your RSpec files, the ones ending in spec.rb. The setup guides usually show exactly what setting to add.
Makes sense. Okay, so beyond testing, just understanding a big code base, navigating around, Rails apps can get complex. What helps there?
Code intelligence and navigation are definitely key. Now, Ruby LSP handles a lot of this, but it's worth mentioning Ruby Solargraph.
Solargraph, right. I remember using that before LSP got big.
Exactly. For a long time, it was the main language server for Ruby in VS Code. It offered IntelliSense, code completion, inline docs. Still does.
So why LSP now mostly?
LSP generally have a broader feature set now, and the setup is often simpler, less reliant on project-specific gem installations. But if you're still using Solargraph, or need to for some reason, remember you usually need to add the Solargraph gem to your project's gem file in the development group to get the full benefit.
Okay, so LSP is kind of the modern default, but Solargraph is still around.
That seems to be the consensus, yeah. But there are other, more focused navigation helpers too, like Copy Ruby Reference.
Oh, what's that do?
It's super simple but useful. You right-click a class or module, and it copies the full name, like module A, module class name, to your clipboard.
Oh, that's handy. Saves typing up those long nested names.
Definitely. And specifically for Rails, Rails schema or Rails DB schema are great.
For looking at the database structure.
Yeah, they show your DB schema right in the VS Code sidebar tables, columns, the works. Some even give you IntelliSense for column names when you're writing database queries in your code.
Oh, wow. And quick navigation to schema.rb.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes checking your database structure really quick.
Cool. What about digging into gems? Sometimes you need to see the source code of a library you're using.
Right. For that, Bust a Gem is a really interesting one. It needs a little setup. First, you install a gem called Ripper Tags and build tags for your project. But once that's done, you can often just click on a method name from a gem in your code, and it'll take you right into the gem source code, like stepping into the library itself.
Whoa. That's powerful for understanding how things work under the hood.
It really is. And one more for navigation, specifically in Rails views, Rails Open Partials.
Let me guess.
No.
It opens partials when you click on the render call.
Exactly. You see render partial, some partial, you click some partial, and boom, you're in that file. Super handy.
Nice. Any caveats?
One blog post mentioned it might potentially conflict with Solargraph, so just something to be aware of if you happen to use both.
Gotcha. Okay, we've covered understanding and moving around code. What about keeping it clean? Formatting, linting, crucial stuff.
Absolutely crucial. And like we said, Ruby LSP handles a lot of this now with Rubocop or syntax tree integration. But if you want a dedicated Rubocop tool, the Ruby Rubocop extension is very popular. It gives you that real-time linting, highlights issues, and can often autocorrect them based on your projects.rubocop.iml file. Keeps the whole team on the same page, style-wise.
Makes sense. What about non-Ruby files like JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and ERB?
Yeah, for that broader formatting, Prettier is fantastic. It handles loads of file types.
Does it handle ERB? Okay. Embedding Ruby in HTML can be tricky for formatters.
It can sometimes need a bit of specific configuration for ERB, or some folks prefer a dedicated ERB formatter like aliarif.vscode erb-beautify. That one uses the HTML beautifier gem under the wraps.
Okay, so options exist even for tricky ERB formatting. Any other little helpers for writing clean code?
Definitely. And Wise is brilliant. Simple, but it just automatically adds the end keyword when you finish a Ruby block. Saves you from those annoying syntax errors,
Oh, I need that.
right? And Ruby interpolation autocomplete. When you type the hash symbol hashtag inside a double-quoted string, it automatically adds the curly braces for interpolation.
Nice. Another little time saver. Those things really add up.
They really do. Fewer keystrokes, less mental friction.
Okay, now, inevitably things break. Debugging. How's the VS Code story for debugging Ruby and Rails these days? It used to feel a bit clunky sometimes.
It's definitely gotten much, much better.
Yeah.
The Ruby LSP itself actually has built-in debugging support now using the standard Ruby debug gem.
Oh, really? Integrated into LSP?
Yeah. Alternatively, the VS Code RDBG extension is another really solid option that uses the same debug gem.
So how do you set it up? Is it complicated?
You typically need to create a launch.json file inside .vscode folder in your project.
Right, the standard VS Code debug config.
Exactly. You define configurations in there telling VS Code how to start your script or Rails app in debug mode. Then you can set breakpoints, step through code, inspect variables, all the usual stuff.
What about for Rails specifically? Anything special needed?
Sometimes, yeah. For Rails running via something like Foreman or BindDev, you might need to tweak your procfile.dev slightly to make sure the debugger can attach to the running Rails process correctly. Both the LSP docs and the RDBG extension page have good examples of how to set up launch.json and handle the procfile part.
Okay, cool. So debugging is definitely a viable, well-supported thing now.
Absolutely. Much less painful than it might have been a few years ago.
Great. Before we move off extensions entirely, are there any other maybe utility or general productivity boosters you came across that are worth mentioning for Ruby Rails devs?
Oh yeah, quite a few cool ones. Megami is neat. It looks at your gem file and puts little color indicators next to your gems, showing if they're up to date, have minor updates, or are significantly behind.
Oh, that's handy for keeping dependencies fresh.
Yeah. Highlight lets you define custom rules to, well, highlight specific code patterns. People find it useful for making Ruby code inside ERB templates stand out more clearly.
I can see that. What about front-end stuff like Tailwind?
If you use Tailwind CSS, the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension is pretty much essential because you auto-completion for classes, hover info, and it has settings to make it work well inside ERB and with Rails helpers like content tag.
Nice. Anything for just general editor organization?
Color tabs is kind of fun, but also useful. It colors your open editor tabs based on rules you set up, like making all your test files have a green tab or something. Helps visual scanning.
Little visual cues. I like it.
And then general VS Code power tools that are great for any kind of development, but especially helpful in Rails projects. VS Code great icons for better file identification in the Explorer. Git Lens for amazing Git integration right in the editor scene code history, authors, blame, all that.
Git Lens is indispensable, yeah.
.env for highlighting and managing environment variables in .env files. And editor config for VS Code, really important for teams to ensure consistent basic coding styles like indentation and line endings across different editors.
Wow, that's a solid list. It really paints a picture of how customizable and powerful VS Code can become.
Absolutely. It's less about VS Code having everything built in and more about composing your ideal environment using these extensions.
So we've talked a lot about extensions. What about VS Code's own settings? Are there specific built-in settings that really benefit Ruby and Rails work?
Yes, definitely. Tweaking some core settings can make a big difference. Sticky scroll is a great one.
Sticky scroll.
Yeah, it keeps the current class and method definition visible at the top of your screen as you scroll down long files. Really helps you stay oriented.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. Keeps the context in view.
Exactly. Another big one is enabling Emmet for ERB files. Emmet lets you write HTML super fast with CSS selector-like abbreviations.
Right, like typing ULI5 and hitting tab.
Yeah. By adding emmet.include languages, DOMA.html, to your settings.json, you get that power inside your .html.erie files. Huge time saver for views.
Okay, definitely enabling that one. What else?
We'll format on save, obviously. Setting editor.formatonsave.true is pretty much essential. Let Rubocop, via LSP or the extension, or prettier, clean up your code every time you hit save.
Set it and forget it.
Exactly. Format on type, editor.formatOnType, true, can also be nice. It does things like auto-continuing comments or closing brackets as you type, enabling semantic highlighting, editor.semantic-highlighting.enabled, true, lets the Ruby LSP do that richer, more meaningful code coloring we talked about.
Right. Turning that on makes sense if you're using LSP.
And you can configure the LSP itself further in your settings, like telling it which Ruby version manager you use with Ruby LSP.Ruby version manager, or specifying exactly which formatter or linters you prefer with Ruby LSP.formatter and Ruby LSP.linters.
Ah, so you can fine-tune LSP's behavior.
Precisely. And for CSS in your ERB views, you can help VS Code find your style sheets using css.stylesheets and enable CSS completion in ERB files with css.enabled languages.
Okay, lots of little tweaks that add up to a smoother experience. Now, thinking about teams working together, how do you make sure everyone's VS Code is set up consistently? It can be chaos otherwise.
That is such an important point for collaboration. VS Code actually has good solutions for this built right in. First, you can create a file named .vscodeextensions.json in your project repository.
Okay.
In that file, you list the IDs of the recommended extensions to the project. When someone new opens the project, VS Code sees that file and prompts them, hey, this project recommends these extensions, want to install them.
Oh, that's brilliant. Makes onboarding much easier.
Totally. And second, you can use workspace settings. You create a .vscodesettings.json file.
Ah, project-specific settings.
Exactly. Settings you put in there override the user's global settings, but only for that specific project, that workspace. So you can enforce things like format on save should be true, or specify the default formatter, ensuring everyone uses the same rules for this project.
So you can commit both extensions.json and settings.json to your repo.
Yep, commit them, and everyone gets the same baseline setup. It drastically reduces inconsistencies.
That's huge. What about going even further, like ensuring the whole environment is identical? Operating systems, Ruby versions, databases.
For that level of consistency, especially across different machines and operating systems, you'd look at dev containers.
Dev containers. Heard of those. They use Docker, right?
You define your entire development environment, OS, dependencies, tools, and even pre-configured VS Code extensions inside a Docker container definition. Then, everyone on the team just develops inside that container using VS Code's remote containers extension.
So everyone has the exact same setup, guaranteed.
Pretty much. It eliminates almost all works on my machine problems. It's a more involved setup initially, but for teams, the consistency benefits can be massive.
Definitely something to consider for larger distributed teams. Okay, stepping back a bit, looking at those Reddit discussions and community chatter again. What was the overall vibe? Are people generally happy using VS Code for Rails?
Mixed, but generally positive, I'd say. You see a huge range of preferred extensions, which shows people are definitely making it work for them in different ways. A common thread, though, was the idea that VS Code can be great for Ruby Rails, but it requires more conscious effort to configure it well compared to an IDE like RubyMine, which comes more batteries included, specifically for Ruby.
So more setup work, potentially a higher ceiling or flexibility.
Maybe, yeah. You tailor it exactly how you want it. And people were definitely optimistic about the future, especially seeing Shopify heavily investing in and developing the Ruby LSP. That feels like a strong positive signal for the ecosystem.
But some still prefer RubyMine.
Oh, for sure. Some developers just value the deeply integrated, out-of-the-box experience of a dedicated IDE, especially for things like advanced refactoring or arguably sometimes a smoother debugging setup initially. It really comes down to personal preference and project needs.
No single right answer, as usual.
Pretty much. VS Code is a powerful, flexible option, but it takes some curating.
Okay, so if we had to boil it all down, what's the main takeaway for someone listening who wants to level up their Ruby and Rails game in VS Code?
I think the core message is, don't be discouraged if it doesn't feel perfect immediately. With a smart selection of these extensions we've talked about and taking the time to configure your settings, VS Code can absolutely be a top-tier, highly productive, and even enjoyable environment for Ruby and Rails.
So it's capable, but you need to be intentional about setting it up.
Exactly. You need to be proactive. Explore the extensions, tweak the settings, find what clicks for your workflow and your project's demands. The tools are there. You just need to assemble them effectively.
That's really clear and super practical advice. Thanks for walking us through all of that. It's a lot to take in, but incredibly valuable.
My pleasure. It's an evolving space, so it's good to survey the landscape.
Absolutely. And that actually leads nicely into a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. Considering how quickly things are moving, especially around the Ruby LSP, thanks to Shopify and the community, what new possibilities might be just around the corner for Ruby and Rails developers using VS Code? What parts of the workflow, maybe things we didn't even cover today, would you like to see become even smoother or more integrated in VS Code in the future? Something to think about until our next deep dive.